Hey, Coffee is me, podcast listeners. Welcome to another episode. And this time you can see us. That's new. Look at that. It's me here, Valerian, your host. And on the other side, I have Rahul Reddy from Subko Coffee. Welcome, Rahul.
Thank you, Valerian. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for making time for this. And this is new. You are the first one. You're the first video guy on this podcast.
Well, that's very unfortunate for me, but at least you get to show my hat to people, so I'm okay with that. Yeah.
So what's up with the hat? I mean, man, dude, I saw you here. You came cupping, and your hat almost always falls into the cupping bowls. What's up with that?
Yeah, it's a bit of a hazard during cuppings, but no, it's funny because I'm based out in Bombay or Mumbai, India at the moment, and I'm virtually like when I moved there about 3.5 years ago. I swear I was literally the only guy in that entire city of like 22 million people that was wearing a hat like this. But it is, I I don't know. I lived in France as a student, as a bachelor student, and I kind of just like picked up a hat and I liked it and I started wearing it, and it's sort of been associated with with me for those who know me now for the last decade or so. So that's the story with the hat, and I will never take it off. So
Oh, how are showers?
showers are the one exception, and I will be gifting you a hat of this nature after this podcast. So
You're kidding me.
no, I'm serious. I have one right here. It's got like your name
So I have
written
to
on it.
wear it?
No, you can choose to wear it, maybe just for cuppings.
Awesome.
A little more
Well,
challenge thrown in your way, given Valerian is an incredible cupper, and yeah, as you just mentioned, I mean, it was such a cool like privilege really to be invited over to do a cupping with you guys a week or so ago. So thank you for that.
yeah, we cannot talk about the cupping, unfortunately. What was
Yeah,
that? It's a secret. Oh, I hate secrets. Anyway, it was privilege on my side because it's so awesome to cup with people from all over the world. Because we kind of calibrated here at lab. We know what we like. We know how we score coffees. But doing it with you, I mean, that was really awesome. I mean, it's like you are like on opposite side of the world, and yet we scored very similarly, which was for me like,
yeah. It's I was I'm always like a little jittery about initially about cupping with folks. I would say who aren't at origin where I'm based, in India, because obviously we end up drinking, even those of us in this sort of Q grading community, we end up drinking a lot of coffees that have similar characteristics, given that we evaluate primarily Indian coffees, and so it's really important for me to have these experiences to know, well, hey, someone with at the caliber of Valerian and the boot team, is my palette still calibrated, on a global sort of level around different origins, and I was, pleasantly pleasant affirmation that we cupped quite similarly.
and those coffees were hard. Those
Yeah,
coffees were rare, unusual, and even for me, when I cup them, like, I don't know. So,
yeah, totally. Although, yeah, I guess I know we can't talk too much about what that cupping was, but so it's quite funny. Your audience is going to be a little annoyed at this point. I think, like, what is this mystery cupping? Where was
I
this?
know.
But it was there's certainly a rare, and weirdly enough, the flavor profiles were quite relational for me, with a lot of the more experimental Indian coffees that I can share a little bit about today that I've been working with. So that was cool.
Yeah, so let me just put the listeners in ease. I'm going to talk about them at some point. So it's just like, it's the ITNDA thing came into coffee, and it's just like, oh no, because I'm so excited. Anyway, let's move on so people don't go like, these people are crazy. They are not going to reveal this. I will at some point, no worries. All right, so usually I have this first question for all my guests, and that's your first experience with coffee. Like, do you remember your first sip of coffee?
Ooh, first sip. It's a very interesting question. So I just like a quick background on me. I mean, I did grow up in the Bay Area primarily, where Valerian is and are right now. But I did have like a brief bit of my childhood was spent in South India, and there's a very there is surprisingly there is a coffee culture, like a kind of non-specialty coffee culture that exists in India. There's this beverage called filter coffee, and it's ironic because it has nothing to do with the way we refer to filter coffee and specialty coffee, but so it's like quite confusing. Essentially, it's like a very adulterated. It's delicious, but it's like a very adulterated beverage where the theory is that the the advent of French colonialism in India left a legacy in South India where the French and the British colonists would essentially cut coffee that they would sell domestically in the colonies with chicory, which you also see in New Orleans as a vestige of New Orleans coffee, which ironically is also a former French colony. So there's a weird relation randomly between New Orleans and like Tamil Nadu and Kerala and South India, and that was probably my first like coffee experience. But that I can kind of recall was this. It's very sweet, milky, very satisfying, kind of super hot, like way hotter than any SCA guideline would ever allow for. But that one and funnily enough, another thing that kind of defined my coffee journey on a personal level, I would say before specialty, or maybe just when specialty was sort of coming up in the Bay Area. My first ever job was as a Starbucks barista. So this was, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I like to talk about this because it's not, Starbucks hasn't influenced much of what I've done since, but I still owe some professional coffee experience to them, and I did have my first occupational coffee experience at Starbucks like in 2005 6. So yeah, so those are two things that kind of stand out, and yeah, in terms of my first sip of two very different coffees, one very sweet, one kind of burnt, but hey, you know.
Dude, I don't think you listened to this podcast from beginning because it's many episodes, but I started with Starbucks coffee. Like that was my first coffee and I was like, oh my gosh, this is different. So
Yeah,
Starbucks definitely has its place. I mean, we can learn from them, from management, and there's even
absolutely.
Pete's. Like I have to say that we have some students from Pete's coming to our lab and we open their eyes what the real coffee is.
That's amazing.
Nothing against Pete's, like no hate there. It's just like,
Yeah.
it's different. They come here, they learn about, like let's say specialty coffee. They kind of get like they get the bug, like we do have the bug,
Right.
right?
No. I do agree with you. I fully agree that there's a lot to learn from, how Starbucks has built a highly professionalized coffee experience so vastly in so many geographies. And I think, certainly there's respect there for them, regardless of the direction they've chosen to go in with regards to, perhaps traceability and roasting, roasting style standards, etc. All of that can obviously be, you know, uh, pulled apart, but I think there's a lot to learn from them as well.
Dude, it works for them, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So it's like they do it. Okay. So I'm always looking like that. Now people know that I actually have notes on this podcast. They will think that, oh, Valerie is so smart before. And now we reveal the truth. I do have notes which I have to consult. But I have these questions like, did I really write this down? So the question is, why did you start coffee and not selling socks?
Oh man, well, yeah, socks were not even on my radar, so
Hats.
that would hats, yeah, hats. No, I Valerian. I mean, for me, I guess. Do you want me to like give a little bit of a backdrop as to what Subco is, or do you want to get to that afterwards?
So let's go from beginning. First of all, tell us
Okay.
what's the situation in Mumbai when it comes to specialty coffee or India generally. Like, do people buy it? Are there other brands? And then let's move on, to your how and why did you start at Subco and what does it stands for?
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Sure. So yeah, I mean, a little bit about sort of the journey, skipping the fluff, about sort of how exactly I got there. My background was, not in coffee or food and beverage for the majority of my career. I guess this is somewhat of a common story at this point, with a lot of folks in the industry now. However, essentially, I'd had kind of two stints before coffee. One was in more of the like sort of branding and marketing side of technology, sort of consumer technology companies, and then my heart was always much more in political economy and social impact and that sort of side of academia and professional life. So I transitioned away from tech at a point, and I'd been moving kind of around the world at this stage. I think I told you, Valerian, when we met, but I was sort of spending a lot of time between France, New York, London, eventually the Philippines and India, all sort of various time frames. But I transitioned from tech into sort of the social entrepreneurship space, and then I became sort of a South Asia focused development economist, technically, I guess. Given, I mean, not that I feel like an expert in that, but the idea was that I wanted to focus my efforts professionally on the South Asia region. And throughout this period of time, I had been, very, very fortunate to have lived in, arguably a couple of the, world's best cities from like a consumer point of view for specialty coffee experiences. And all of these Aussies, by the time I moved to London, all of these Aussies and Kiwis had kind of started that whole specialty revolution in London. And there was some incredible, projects that had started at the time. I mean, there was roasteries like Ozone and shops like Proof Rock and Square Mile obviously had come up at that point. And so this was like a huge learning and a huge exposure for me. In New York when I was there, of course, there were already Blue Bottles there, and there was Stumptown. There was a really cool project, like from a concept point of view, that I was partially inspired by, called Devoción, which was focused purely on Colombian coffee, alone, based in Brooklyn. So there's a few companies out there that I was kind of like following closely and just understanding what origin stories looked like. And I was like, wait a second, I know from my childhood and my background that India has coffee plantations, and I was sitting there thinking, why have I never seen a single Indian plantation mentioned by any of these coffee roasters in any of these countries? And it kind of piqued my interest, as to why that might be the case. I was like, oh, maybe there's very little coffee growing in India. That was my first thought, right? Just did a quick Google search. Honestly, a few hours later, I was like, wait, okay, maybe this is data that's maybe 4 or 5 years old now, but the last data set I had seen was like, oh, actually, India is the fifth largest producer of coffee in the world. And I was like, this makes no sense out of like, what, 25 odd countries or so? I'm not sure how many exactly coffee producing countries there are currently, but I was like, okay, India is in like the top quartile of all of this from an agricultural point of view. So maybe it just sucks. Like maybe I was learning about varietals, I was learning about all these things, and I was like, maybe the coffee is just inherently bad. Like maybe the crop sucks. And then it turned out that wasn't necessarily true either, and that's not just not how agriculture works. It's not just inherently bad. And then I started learning more about processing and stuff. And then I said, okay, so there's a processing problem and a knowledge transfer problem with regards to how plantations work in India, and not enough incentivization, for the plantations and the planters to upgrade their infrastructure, create better processes on the farm level to increase cup scores, and then command higher prices in the market, etc., etc. So I started learning about all this, and then I was like, okay, so what's going on in coffee, to answer your question, Valerian, in India today? And this was about I want to say about a year before the pandemic started, where like I was thinking a lot, very like actively about coffee, India, Asia in general, and coffee. Of course, as a lot of your audience already would know, Indonesia, kind of broke through from the Asian point of view in specialty like a while back. Whether you love the coffees from there or not, I mean, they're present, and so that was cool, and that was like an inspiration. I was like, okay, interesting. But even then, like the domestic market within pretty much every origin country, but in like in Indonesia, was still quite limited in terms of like how coffee was positioned within the country, at least specialty wise. And so I was like, okay, what's happening in India? And yeah, to answer your question, as of when I started kind of taking the topic more seriously and thinking a little bit more about what I might want to do around this kind of problem that India had, there were already a couple of solid brands, consumer brands on the roasted coffee side that had started up. There is a quite a respected now quite reasonably like large scale brand called Blue Tokai, which is largely credited with having probably started the idea of like traceable coffee in India and in the cafe format and then retail. So it had, they had sort of inspired, I think, interest in at least being like, okay, let's identify a farm. Let's identify what, at least that this coffee was a washed coffee or, on odd occasion when you would find a natural processed coffee, which until the last like 2 years was like not a thing you would find in India really, at least not commonly. There had certainly been some positive movement in the sort of like metropolitan areas, so cities like New Delhi, Mumbai, Bombay, Bangalore, Bangalore is sort of known as like the Silicon Valley of India, and it happens to be it's sort of like the entry point for sort of coffee country in the south of India, in the Chikmagalur region. So you would fly into Bangalore and then you would drive about 4 to 5 hours away to the plantation areas with higher elevation areas. So yeah, to answer your question, before Subko started, there was already some positive momentum in India around reimagining, I guess, what coffee could mean to a society that was addicted to tea. I think there was that level of movement had started, and then we tried to take a very radically different approach to it, but yeah.
Okay, so how? So what was your, I would say, thought process when you go like, I'm going to start a company, and it's going to be called Subko?
Yeah, so I guess a good starting point to answer that would be what is Subko? In fact, Valerian, it's pronounced Subko.
Okay.
So a lot of people read it as Subko, but I like to kind of make that correction because it's a play on words. In fact, so if you can you can see it on my shirt here. So
Okay.
so Subko it's short for subcontinent. So a lot of people might know that India is referred to as the subcontinent because it's not an entire continent. It's like a basin, geographic basin like this. So it's referred. The Indian kind of subcontinent comprises of South Asian countries, really. So, former British colonies like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, all the way stretching to kind of Myanmar, which also grows some really fantastic single origin coffee now. So Subko is short for subcontinent, and in several Indian or subcontinental languages, it means for everybody. So Subko is actually if you say Subko in Hindi or Urdu, it means for everyone. So the idea there was, could we spread the gospel of Asian and with a focus on South Asian coffee to the world? And this name kind of encompassed all of that. So yeah, I mean, I mean, I don't know, Valerian. This is really like, with the risk of being a bit cliched, since we're in the valley and you hear shit like this all the time. I would say that I didn't like Subko was always an idea and very mission oriented. It was not like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to start a company and I want to do it in coffee. Like I never, that was never my frame of mind. I had an inherent consumer passion for the origin stories of coffee, the variety of interfaces you could have around the world in a specialty coffee environment. That was inspirational to me conceptually. And then I guess a little bit of pride came in there when I was like, okay, well, why can India not have a role to play in this? Is it possible for us to improve our processing? Is it possible for us to improve the way we depict and brand and package and do all of these things to inspire people to give this origin a chance within the tapestry of different coffee that people enjoy? And the other piece of what Subco does, and Valerian, I think we talked about this as well when we met, but is given that India is still kind of, I'd say very rapidly it's shifting, like very rapidly, but still kind of acclimating to the idea that coffee is not a roadside milky chicory laced beverage that costs 20 Indian rupees, and in fact it's something that is expensive to produce, to roast, to package, and hence can occupy more of a premium positioning in that domestic marketplace. And I think as we're acclimating to that, I also had a certain passion for baking and craft baking, and so the idea when it comes to, like, as you asked me about starting a company, the idea was always, it was more about the concept and the mission of bringing Indian coffee to, like, what we later would define as like an 85 point plus standard, of on like this SCA scale. With that being our standard for like the retail coffee that we would sell, we also wanted to provide a very distinctly highly technical craft baking experience, arguably, for one of the first times in India. And we wanted the baking program and to be a vertical of its own. So we would focus on sourdough bread and laminated doughs, so experimental croissants, queen amands, like things that you typically certainly wouldn't see in India, and in fact things that are quite revered, here in San Francisco, in London, and everywhere, because people generally understand that these are very challenging baked goods to master and to get them consistent every day. And it really went hand in hand with coffee to me, and so that's the other part of what Subco has been doing. So
For me, that was fascinating because, first of all, by the way, I pronounce Subco correctly in a Valerian English, because I actually
ah,
say subcontinent, and that's coming from my original languages. But yeah, okay, I have to now remember. Based on Subco, I remember that it's not pronounced subcontinent but subcontinent in English. So there's a
exactly,
language lesson
exactly.
for me.
Fair enough, fair enough.
So I looked at your Instagram, and I did the research about your company. First of all, there's not too much about you, like you guys. You kind of hide a little bit behind that. But your Instagram is full of these amazing baking goods, and I was like, wait a moment, isn't this a coffee company? Am I in the wrong place? So and I am fascinated too by sourdough, and I make myself a sourdough bread and sourdough things, but I never mastered anything like you guys have on a page. So don't tell me that you bake it, right? Do you bake it?
Not me personally,
Okay.
unfortunately, but no, it's funny you say that, Valerian. I mean, we so I set out to do a lot of things to try. I mean, this was the aspiration. I don't know. People will have to tell us if how we're doing on this, but to redefine the coffee category, like from a specialty coffee point of view, and in at origin, remember, like, we're not operating in New York City, or where there's a mature understanding of like specialty coffee across the city to some degree, or at least a habituation to it, rather. So we were like, okay, let's not, when it comes to things like, as you put it, our Instagram handle, or generally the social media content that we create. I was very, very stringent with my team. So two things I think to note about that. One is that I took an approach, very challenging approach, where we don't outsource a single piece of what we do. Meaning, we don't have a digital marketing agency, we don't have an outsourced design firm. We essentially, I'm creating a design studio in house at Subco. It's actually kind of like the third vertical of what we do right now, which is where we call it the designery. I mean, it's kind of like a cheeky way of calling it, but essentially what that means is we go extremely in depth in how we want to convey visual information and communication around baking and coffee, such that I kind of told the team in the beginning, like, guys, I don't want our feed to be yet another coffee feed with, you know, shitloads of pictures of latte art. Like, no disrespect to anybody that wants to position themselves that way, but I was like, okay, there's enough latte art on the internet. There's enough, shots of packaging constantly going out on feeds, like trying to sell coffee beans. Of course, when we have a really cool micro lot dropping, we want to talk about it. But there are ways with a more artistic direction, with an educational direction built in. And there are things like, text overlays, which can identify what's happening on the farm level or in the bakery that we can utilize to really engage people. So we've tried to take that very seriously, and hence, you won't see a lot of the typical directions that people go into, like loads of cafe shots, loads of brewing shots. We do want to do a little bit more of it, and I think there's of course value in showcasing the craft from a barista's point of view, from a roaster's point of view. So that's definitely something I'm working on, doing more frequently. But I think overarchingly, the idea is how do we meld the sort of artistic nature inherently of farming, roasting, baking, and how do we tie all that together in a very Indic light. So we use a lot of like typography that utilizes, like, even our logo unit, if you can see it on the screen here, it's built with three languages within it. So Subko is obviously Latin, English, and then below that, the two kind of, arguably, India is very complex linguistically. There's, I actually don't even know how many languages and then dialects exist in India, but arguably there's like two kind of scripts that define India, which are the sort of Sanskrit or like Devanagari Hindi script, and the Urdu script over here, which is like a Persian adaptation of Persian. So we kind of built all of that into this logo unit that we call the Tri-script, and so we try to keep the mission and the identity of what we're doing and the origin at the centerpiece of everything, and not purely showcasing otherwise sexy shots of us brewing coffee every day. So that's sort of how we position things with the bakehouse and the roastery. Sure.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. We will talk about branding a little bit more, but before we do, I'm going back to your setup, to your warehouse and factory. Like, can you tell us a bit more about it? Like, how are you doing your production, and how did you maybe decide about the tools you use?
Sure. Yeah, I guess we have a little bit more in common with the Boot Academy and Valerian in this regard as well. When I went to the facility in San Rafael, I was like, oh, this is like a museum for Gießen. And I was like, that's amazing. And this is not a sponsored comment. But no, we do roast our single origin beans on. We now have two Gießens based in an old printing, actually like a former printing press, which has been converted into it's fairly large by Bombay standards. Bombay real estate is akin to Manhattan real estate. It's like it's very, very challenging to find a large space in the center of the city which does not cost you an arm and a leg. Literally, I mean, in like dollar terms, right? So it's obviously highly dense, highly populated city. So, but what we managed somehow to identify this really interesting like space, and quite centrally located, but out of the way. I guess you could look at it as, if you're looking at, I spent a lot of time in New York, so I'm just going with those references. But it's sort of like maybe what like Bushwick is like today in Brooklyn, sort of a little bit deeper Brooklyn, but still very like accessible to the rest of Brooklyn. It's a little bit like that. The area is called Baikala, and yeah, we started off with this white. We took a kind of chance, and maintenance is tougher with this, but we took on a white Gießen, the 6 kg Gießen to start with, and yeah, that's that's how we started. I was roasting. I guess maybe I can touch on the whole COVID angle to what we do and how that happened. But given we actually started 3 days before the COVID lockdown hit. That's when Subko actually began. So it was a very dramatic and stressful and frankly like unlikely scenario that we are still here talking to you today, Valerian. But we started on the 6 kg Gießen, and then we actually about, let's say, less than a year ago now. We've only been around for 2022. So a year into starting Subco, we were in the fortunate position to justify taking on a second machine. So we now have the W15A Gießen coffee roaster as well, side by side. And what just to finish that thought, instead of having I think this is quite unique to Subco. If I'm not mistaken, I've never seen another concept that's quite built this way, from my just general research and exposure. But what we do is we don't call our space a roastery; we call it the craftery. And it's the reason for that is it's an amalgamation. It is primarily our coffee roastery, of course, but and our sort of sensory lab kind of thing that we're building out. Not nearly as nice as what you guys have going on in Boot, but we're trying. And also it's an open format, croissant shaping and rolling and sourdough creation facility. So you can see us essentially not doing the actual baking because the oven's in the back, but all of the preparation, all of the doughs, all the rolling, all of that stuff is fully visible and transparent when you come there to the craftery. And you can see us roasting, you can see us, our bakery team, working right behind there. So it's this weird amalgamation, and then our design team sits in the little office next door and we start to design. So we call that the designery. And so all of that kind of comes together under this craftery umbrella. So that's where we roast and that's where we bake, and we try to design as well. So
Two comments on it. First of all, love it. That's really awesome. I like that. Because as you said, you incorporate your design, and we're going to talk about it in a sec because I was fascinated about the design. Second, I have this thing going on this podcast is the size of the coffee roaster. People always ask, what size should I start with? And I always tell them, well, I think that it makes sense if you're going to be a wholesale roaster to think around 15 kilo per batch, because you can usually roast less on it, like 8, but you cannot
yeah,
roast on 6 kilo 20, right, per batch. And without you knowing this, you are living proof that, yeah, I mean, if you're making this seriously, then that 15 kilo makes sense, right? So, and I know a lot of people think
yeah.
like, I want to try it first and see where it goes. But I don't know, that 6 kilo Gießen is not a cheap toy, so
No, exactly. I mean, I was actually advised similarly against my decision, so I think there's a little bit of regret there in my initial choice to stick with the yeah, to stick with the six. I mean, obviously, as a lot of I guess I don't love the word entrepreneur, but sure, sort of young folks in the coffee space, or just people new to the coffee space will obviously try to optimize costs, and it seems okay to not know how much coffee you'll actually be able to sell and to get that 5 or 6 kg Probat or Gießen. Uh, but then suddenly you're confronted with, oh, okay, we don't suck, maybe. So now we're kind of screwed, and now we have to invest all over again in a very short time frame. So, I would agree with that. I think if you have a strong enough go to market strategy, and you have a very strong I'd say brand language, and a very strong mission behind what contribution you want to make to specialty coffee, I think it makes some sense to kind of probably invest in at least a 12 or 15, depending on the company. Or
yeah. So what I do now on my business course, which is really awesome, because I had these conversations forever, and it's a words against words. And by the way, I made this mistake multiple times in my life, So as my green plantation was growing, I was always making that mistake.
okay,
So I have this exercise for them when we have a Google Doc, or Google Sheet, and I put in the numbers. I will say, hey, Rahul, how much money you want to make a year? And you say, I want to make this much. So I put it in. Then, so basically slowly we can work ourselves to the number of batches you have to roast. And also we go like, okay, how many days you want to roast? Let's say you decide 2 or 3 days a week, because obviously if you start yourself as a small business, you have
tough.
to do sales, you have to do marketing, you have to do everything, right? So you cannot roast all the time. And most of the time the number is between 10 12 kilos is the minimum. And I still
Right.
think that people have small eyes there. I had people who walked out, not really walked out, but end of the course, they were like, I'm so happy I did this because there's no money in coffee. And I was like, what? Yeah, because they want to make $350,000. They were, one was a guy who does investments, and he was like, this is not the number I want. And the second was a very successful IT guy who said that, you know what, I just stick to my profession because I make much more money there. I was like, what were you thinking? It's a food product, man.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's a good point, Valerian. One thing that's happened, I'd say, I mean, we've made a certain kind of, what I gather is that we've made a certain kind of impact in the coffee space and in the sort of baking space in India, and one that's fortunately for us even stretched beyond our borders with just some like recognition by folks that like Sprudge and Standard Magazine and a few others. And what I mean by that is just, what that's done is inspired this, which on one hand is great. To some degree, I think, not us alone, but us plus other brands that have come before us have inspired sort of this idea that, coffee is a great business to get started with and to go into. And I think obviously I support that. But I think to your point, it's like there has, in my opinion, there has to be sort of the right kind of, background knowledge, education around why you're doing this, what the outcomes might be like, and then tailoring your commitment accordingly, right? Because I think if you just look at this and you see a few very successful, retail coffee brands, and you think that, this is just a way to make, a shitload of money quickly, I think that might not be the best reason to try to get into this line of work. So, yeah.
No, I agree with you. And I agree with you that there has to be somebody who gives you realistic expectations. Because I
Yes,
recently
exactly.
saw a YouTube video, and I didn't watch it. I should watch it next time I see it. And there was the tag on the video was like, "How can you make six figures doing this?" And it was a guy who roasting coffee. I'm like, uh,
Um,
you know, I rather give you realistic expectations. I always tell my students in the beginning of the course, I want two outcomes on end of this week, on Friday. You either on Monday you start and you hustle, or on Monday you decide I'm going to do something else in my life. Because wasting your
Absolutely,
time is the biggest investment you can lose. That doesn't come
for
back.
sure.
Nobody can, money you can lose and you can gain and it can come and go, but your time, that's it. You know,
Agreed, fully agreed.
at least I don't know if there is somebody who knows how to go back in time and stuff. Just let me know.
Right. Let me know as well.
Okay, so pardon me to saying this bluntly, but you guys had some money to start this company because you started with Gießen, right? I guess you have a packaging line or and professional bakery. So you had investors behind you, or did you had some secret savings?
Yeah, so the beginning of this was, so just some background as to exactly what this looked like when we started. So I was kind of, the journey was I'd quit my last job before becoming like an entrepreneur, I guess, in January of 2019.
What was your job, if it's
And
not a secret?
it's not a secret. I was a South Asia risk analyst. Yeah, it all sounds very fancy, but basically I was like a researcher and writer around what various challenges and risks people from other countries might face coming to do business in the region, in the sort of South Asia region, political risks, economic risks, things like that. So I was doing that, and I decided it had run its course for me, and I had a decision to make. I was like, okay, either, and this was I was in Bombay at the time. I was in Mumbai. I was based there. Excuse me. And sort of, I think the idea that occurred to me was either this idea of coming back to India and living there and doing something there was just, a failed experiment that, I have to accept that it just wasn't going to be something that lasted very long, which I was okay with. And I was like, okay, I'll go back to New York, look for a job. And at this point, like coffee had become this like obsessive thing in my brain. Like all of the research I told you about before was kind of taking up a lot of my free time. whatever little free time I had, being a consultant. But like, so I was like, okay, let me start talking to like, family, friends, figuring out if in theory this was something I could really flush out in my mind, get the requisite training. Like there's a lot of ifs, at that point. But would there be a possibility of bootstrapping this? And I came up with a budget, and of course, it's true what you said, Valerian, that we started with some expensive equipment that was not it wasn't we didn't need to start with as such. But I think what ended up happening there was there are obviously some cost optimizations as well, given that we're based at origin, that you can also avail. So I think in the end, the two of those things kind of balanced each other out to some degree, in the sort of bootstrapping effort. But what I did, Valerian, basically was I left the job. I spent some time working at Google, in New York City in a past life, and weirdly enough, there was this really cool Polish guy named Marcin, and he used to run the sort of the coffee program for Google, in New York. And I just kind of kept in touch with him, and I was just like, hey man, there's this kind of thing I'm thinking of trying to delve into, and I think there's a story to tell. There's definitely interesting quality, complex coffee to be unearthed in India, and I want to kind of try my hand at seeing how that would look, feel, and be experienced if we could. And basically, he connected me to this roastery, which you may or may not be familiar with, in Brooklyn, called City of Saints Coffee Roasters. They roast on this gigantic, I think it's a 70 kg Loring, and it's insane. But anyway, basically the ask was I essentially got connected to their green bean buyer and head roaster, and this guy named John, super sweet guy, in like sort of like the middle of nowhere ish in Bushwick in Brooklyn. Big sort of warehouse that they made into a roastery, with like tiny little like cafe in the front. It was cool, really cool space. Primarily a wholesale business, but also a bit of retail that they did, and they had a couple of cafes as well. So they were sort of an in between, brand in terms of their model. And essentially, Valerian, what I did is I said, hey, I'm trying to gather some funds to do something here, at Origin in India. But first, I need to learn how to roast coffee because I don't know how to do that. And fortunately, they took me on as like an apprentice. They said, hey, can you kind of contribute to doing what we have to do on a day-to-day basis? And kind of I was like, yeah, for sure. Like I'll wash dishes, I'll wash cold brew vats, I'll get behind the bar, I'll do whatever you need me to do. I just want to learn. And that's sort of how that happened for me. So I spent some time apprenticing, a few months apprenticing with them, as I call it, learning about how their model worked, and my first experiences with Ikawa and other things were there as well. And yeah, that's sort of, and it was during that period, Valerian, that I cupped with them a lot and stuff, and I sort of started thinking, okay, maybe I'm not off here. That I feel like I always felt like I had like a strong palate for understanding the nuances in coffee. I didn't know how to define them, but I felt like reasonably good about that. And I was like, it's a funny story. I started researching about how people in the coffee industry gain some, respect and credibility to do what they want to do in the industry. And one of the things that obviously comes up in this conversation is, Q grading and being able to, sensorially analyze coffee. And I was like, oh, I think I can do this, very naively. And given, I'd worked as a barista years before, and I drank a shitload of coffee from many different origins and processes since, but no formal, real formal training at that stage. But I didn't do all the nuanced research into this. I saw Q grading, and I said, okay, I should go and probably try to get this Q grader thing. And and I signed up. I still remember this is Royal New York, and I was in New York, at the time. So I was like, okay, like I'm here, like before I go back to India, let me just get this done. And it's only after I paid money for this, it's very expensive, fairly expensive certification. At least for me, it was at the time. And then after I've signed up and paid, I started researching it more, and it's like the 21 exams, and you're very rigorous, and you have to pass all of them, and it's like not recommended for anyone below 5 to 7 years in the industry, and all of these different things. And I was like, oh shit, I think I made like a huge mistake. And I actually tried to get out of it, and I called and I said, I think I'm in over my head here. Can I get a refund? And they were like, yeah, we don't really do that, but you can take this exam whenever, like avail it whenever you're ready. And I was like, well, unfortunately, I don't live in New York right now. So anyway, I went for it, and I just attended the 1 week queue, and yeah, basically, I had some trouble with triangulation, but I ended up, eventually through a retake, I got through, and I got the queue. So that gave me a burst of confidence as well when I went back to answer your original question to bootstrap this and gather some funds. I said, okay, I have a lot to learn here, but I think my base is reasonably strong at this point in time for me to try to elevate the experiential and even the sensorial understanding of specialty coffee in India that's sourced from the region. So I was able to bootstrap it with a series of events in the beginning, and yeah, and I kind of chose to stick with with Gießen for a few reasons. I mean, one was that the folks who had started roasting small batch coffee in India were all using Probat machines, and loads of respect for Probat as well. But I tasted some coffees on the Gießen, and I thought if we were going to be the brand that tried to emphasize on more floral and fruit and even boozy and fermentation, I felt the Gießen was doing a little bit more justice to that, in my opinion. I might not be correct on that, but that's how I felt, at least from the coffees I had experienced. So I chose to stick with, to go with the Gießen. And at the time, there was like a couple of Gießens, literally a couple of Gießens in the Indian market. And now there's a lot more than that. But yeah, and then I've always been a massive La Marzocco kind of fan. So I just stuck with La Marzocco, and you'd be surprised, Valerian, because all of these things that seem very normal and simple. Perhaps your experience was similar when you first started in Slovakia. I'm not sure, but for me to procure these machines was not simple. The amount of issues you have with customs duties, with shipping timelines. I mean, now everyone's facing this with all the sort of supply chain issues going on, but it was very challenging actually to get these, and because it wasn't a lot of these machines, distributors, etc., are obviously very keen and bullish on India, given this rapidly large population, rapidly rising middle class, etc. But for people on my side of the equation to set up bars that look and feel world class, but also indigenizing it, and that whole experiential bit that I was committed to, it wasn't easy.
Okay, so a few things. First of all, congrats to becoming a Q grader. It's a very tough exam, and I see how people sweat blood here when they come to take the Q graders here. But it's the first time I ever heard that the Q grader helped either the confidence or maybe even gave a kind of creds to somebody to fund the company. So that's kind of cool. I never thought about it. By the way, I just had my recertification exams like 2 3 weeks
Nice.
ago, so it was very scary. Like it's like you are Q grader, you cup, and then you go every 3 years. You have to renew your certificate, and you go like, oh, I was so nervous like on my first exam. So it was funny.
Oh man.
Yeah, I know. But when it comes to, by the way, I have to admit, I'm a Probat guy.
Yeah.
My company has Probats, not because I hate Geesens. I love Geesens. I love to roast on Geesens. It just happened that at that time we bought Probat and, just fall into our lap. So, but yeah, both roasters are
For sure.
great. And, I don't
Great machine.
think that you should go with a cheap equipment. I didn't ever say that, and I don't want to be associated. If you can afford, buy the best equipment you can, because that's your workhorse. You don't want it break. It's like, for example,
Yeah.
for espresso makers, we have here the La Marzocco, and I never really worked with them because we just couldn't afford them. But once I worked with it in a lab here at Boot Coffee, when I never afforded it, it was green plantation. So when I was working here, I was like,
Mm.
I, I just love it. I'm in love with that machine, and next machine would be La Marzocco for green plantation for sure. And again, maybe if you show me something else and I fall in love with that, and go like, oh yeah, I want that espresso maker. But
A
luckily,
Slayer or yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I don't have exposure to all of them. Otherwise, my life would be very hard because I would not be able to decide. But I really like this one here, the PB, I think it's called. So
PB, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay, so I have one more question about the business percent. We don't have to go deep into it, but many times, people start a roastery, and I see that you have a roastery and a cafe. Do you think economically it makes sense to connect both and start it from get-go?
It's a great question. I think there's a lot of like people that so I'd say the answer is yes. If again, I'm caveating everything by saying yes if you have a strong enough concept that you can get behind, right? If the goal is ultimately to make margins on roasted coffee beans and sell them and do a fine job of sourcing and have some good to decent packaging to do it, I don't know if the incredibly challenging notion of the service industry and getting into the cafe space and all of staffing and training and all of these things. I mean, these have a lot of different rewards, of course, and I've been very fortunate and content with that decision from my side. But I would say part of the reason for that is I still believe, Valerian, that as much as e-commerce and digital platforms and distribution has in many senses democratized the ability for folks to start roasteries, and I think that's amazing. I personally have always still felt that it's at the end of the day, coffee is something you consume. It's sensory. It's something where at least having the ability to sample and taste and experience coffee the way that the company behind the beans, behind the roasted coffee might have intended it, has its own utility. And I think I think of course from an investment point of view, that's a whole nother beast. And that's why I say very carefully that yes, for Subco with the kind of mission we had, it had to kind of always be experiential in nature, with a flagship storefront with several methodologies of brewing coffee within the space, with the ability to taste the baked goods that we create, and then and we started there. But of course, I think it just heavily depends on kind of what the identity is behind the roastery that you want to. There's amazing, some of the best coffee roasteries in the world don't have cafe fronts. So I don't think it's a necessity. I mean, I like Square Mile, for example, is a great example of this. I mean, I know they support a couple of cafes strategically, but they don't have formally, they don't have a cafe. So I don't think there's a one size fits all on this. I think in my opinion, for what we wanted to do for and with Indian specialty, it was a necessity the aspiration to redefine the category and make it a global commodity, was really required a couple of world class but still very Indic cafe experiences to showcase the product. So for us, that was important.
Okay. So moving on to branding, and we talked about it a little bit already, and you answered a few of my questions already. But you said the word bootstrapping, and yet your packaging and your design is incredible. So if I would put number on that
Thank you.
here, because we sometimes help to our students to get quotes from designers we work with or we know. That's like between $30,000 and $70,000 design here in the United States, easy. 30 is like a friend, right? And 70 would be kind of like I know somebody who does a good stuff. So it can go crazy. how did you go about it? Because it's really awesome, man. It's really cool.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I had a couple of options in the beginning when I started this. So one thing that I knew we wanted to do was, focusing on, you know, two streams of like sourcing, whether it was the larger estates that exist in India already and the smallholder farms, working closely with them to push processing in a direction that we wanted from a sensory attribute point of view, meaning like more fruit forward, more boozy, more, whatever attributes that we wanted to see in Indian coffee, arguably for some of the first times. Globally, people would never associate Indian coffee with these characteristics. So that was one commitment. The baking commitment I've spoken about. The third commitment, to answer your question, was okay. Clearly, in addition to some quality and knowledge transfer issues, Indian coffee has a branding problem. It has the green coffee itself has a marketing problem. And I think beyond the greens, the roasted coffee most definitely has a branding problem because the first thing that we needed to think about was, okay, how do we make coffee into something aspirational and indigenous and global at the same time? Like these were like very big goals. Like these were like, I mean, I didn't know the answer to that. I knew that in my brain there had been like a construction of what an Indian coffee brand that could, you know, take inspiration from, and hopefully, with some luck, one day be in the same marketplace as a Square Mile or an Ozone or a Stumptown or what have you. That would need to look and feel extremely tight knit and particular. And the way forward for me was there was a few principles that drove that, and I was like, okay, I can either go to a large agency and pay the kind of fees that you described. I mean, and internationally, and obviously most of my life had been spent outside of India, and I was like, okay, well, my bootstrap budget is now gone. Like 50% of what I have is now going into this design exercise, or I can kind of sit back for a second, think about whether I felt that I had a strong enough concept and creative direction in my own mind, and work with a really talented local designer who was keen to kind of put this concept on the map, and basically with me acting in large part as kind of a creative director along with this designer, and working very, very closely to make this concept reality. So that's the direction I ended up choosing, and I ended up working with an incredibly talented guy named Anirudh, and he goes by the Big Fat Minimalist on Instagram. So y'all who are listening to this, please check out Anirudh's work. He's at at the Big Fat Minimalist. Incredibly talented designer, and he, as far as I know, he had never done anything in the coffee space before, but he had done other consumer brand work. And one day I met him at a coffee shop in Bombay, and I said, "Hey man, I've gotten all these quotations from these like fancy agencies, and I was like, one, I can't afford it. Two, I think I need to work with someone who's going to toil at this concept every day to the most intricate detail, who understands what we need to represent, which is the goal is, if this box is to go on a shelf in a Brooklyn grocery store or something like that, would people be able to immediately associate it with Asia, India, quality, all of these things just by looking at the box?" And that was a fairly lofty goal to start with. And fortunately, me and Anirudh, we spent many months trying to put the design language and logic together. And one of the key components is typography, in fact. So given that we have sort of the in a sense the privilege of having so many different indigenous scripts in the region. In fact, even in the coffee growing regions of India, like you have states, you have about, I don't know the total number of states off the top of my head, but from the major production areas themselves, you have about 4 to 5 different scripts that would be representing the linguistic groups that would be producing the coffee on the farm level. So, I was like, okay, obviously this has to be a big part of the logic in how we build this brand. And so, I worked very closely with him, and he did a phenomenal job of putting together the initial identity. And then I think I brought this up earlier, Valerian. Instead of taking a much more stable and easy, I'd say, or even logical, frankly, route of being like, hey, I need like a social media marketing content generation agency to help me out, like after we've initially got the brand off the ground. I was like, well, to keep this impact of what we created initially with the initial packaging work and all the extensions that would have to come, all the new origins, all the new content, all of the new experiences we wanted to build around Indian specialty, we had to control the design process. And for me, that was why I started kind of thinking about. But then, to your point, we're a startup. We were genuinely, to some degree, bootstrapping, meaning, we can't afford to hire, even individuals like Anirudh, who's an amazing designer in his own right. I knew I couldn't afford to keep him on board as like on a retainer, after the project. So I was like, dude, I mean, help me out. Let me try to build, like, let me try to get a design intern on board and then another designer. And, so we started there, and, we have this amazing group, this amazing crew now of, depending how you define it, between 5 and 6 people working full time on design work, whether it's digital packaging. Yeah. So we have, yeah, I mean, also, video, sound, like, we're kind of like a very experiential sort of a brand in this sense. I keep saying that word, but to me, it feels the most relevant. So yeah, that's sort of how we envision this. And for the baking, as we spoke about in the beginning of the interview, the other thing was just how do we similarly do two things. One is not just post like, food porn is great, but like maybe not just food porn alone. Like, we still had to retain this idea of the indigenous, the Indic, the traceable. So everywhere we can, we actually talk a lot about the produce. We've taken almost a farm to table ish approach to baking, which is something quite novel. Of course, some people in like great brands and in the world like Tartine have done a bit of this, but the idea was, could we tell stories about other Indian spices and fruits and produce and other things, and get those incorporated with our coffee stories, and then utilize our brand language and our design to represent them on our feed in a way that, yes, gives you some like food porn satisfaction, but also ticks these other boxes of typography and traceability. So
No,
yeah.
I was blown away, and I did not know that 5 people work on it, and it makes 100% sense. And I have to say, I love the fact that you make it in-house, and that you can afford and make it in-house, because it's so important. Like with Green Plantation, I'm not there. I'm okay photographer. I make videos. I'm audio, obviously. I'm okay with that. Not great, but I can pull it off. But everybody else is just horrible at it. And they even refuse to do any like stories and stuff. So we hired, outsourced it to a great team, except what happened is they don't understand us. They don't understand what Green Plantation stands for. They don't understand that we are not Starbucks. We don't want to, as you said, convey latte arts. We want to convey stories. For us, the story of the coffee is the most important part, and it was never happening, And it's like, it becomes this kind of wishy-washy, yes, pretty picture, and then there's a lot of fights on these, like conference calls. It's like, hey, but here's the story. But look at that image. You know how much time we spent. It's a great image, but oh boy. So yeah, I'm with you there. Like, I sometimes tell people that maybe even if your pictures are not that amazing, just be you, because
Yeah,
it's like
100%.
I can see through social media. Like, if I see a brand and it's sterile and cold, I can right away go through it. Oh yeah, pretty pictures, but I don't know anything about it. But with
Right.
your,
Yeah.
and I checked it out just recently. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. How does he do it? And turns out, an awesome team.
We do it ourselves. Yeah. I mean, it's thank you so much. I'm sure the team will listen to this and feel really good about that recognition. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm stealing them to Slovakia.
You're stealing them. Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm
Yeah.
kidding.
No.
You seemed worried for a
Yeah. No.
second.
Yeah, right. No, no, it's okay. Yeah, maybe we can do something together, Valerian, on this. But yeah, it's I will add, of course, like again the same caveat, which is the direction myself and my team by extension have taken is certainly a more challenging one to control that process oneself or internally with your own team, whether or not you have one person or four or five. Different visions, different needs, etc., different geographies. But I guess what I would say is, I did spend an ample amount of time and energy uh, piecing together a committed concept, and that stretches. I'd like to think through every piece of what you see regarding Subko. Of course, the product on the cupping table, but or the loaf of sourdough you buy. But I think it really stretches through a lot more than that. And I think trying to gain that kind of clarity, as you do very very important things like train at the Boot Academy and gain those skills. I think in addition to that, what I would sort of suggest from my limited experience so far is trying to gain as much clarity as you can about that kind of commitment that Valerian just talked about, which is okay, if you want to be in the realm of like showcasing latte art and that's your thing, then great, like do that. I think if that's not your thing, then having a lot of clarity about like what are the coffee stories you want to be telling, like what is it? Is it farm oriented that you want to be kind of focused on? Is it roastery oriented? Is it I don't know, or is it kind of a bit of both? Is it education? Is it I think the more clarity the better, and making important decisions around what your financial needs are can often be aided by your own clarity in the beginning of this process, rather than piecemealing it and investing heavily in things because other people did, or you know things like that.
Yeah, so my point wasn't really about latte art, no latte art. It was more about authenticity. Who you stand? Are you for? If you are a
Exactly.
barista, or if your cafe is great at latte art is what you have to, convey.
Exactly.
So that's
Yeah.
cool. But I'll also going back to authenticity. There is this a great thing which happened to me recently. I had a visitor from Purity Wine, and we were just chatting. And they are basically a natural winemaker slash co-fermenting place in Richmond, here in California.
Nice.
And I looked. So Noel is the founder, and I always was criticizing Noel that, hey man, your labels look horrible. You have this interesting wine, but your labels are horrible. So suddenly I see the new labels. I was like, oh wow, there's a big improvement. What happened here? Like kind of pretty cool looking. He said, well, we realize that we have a lot of followers who are artists because it's natural wine, artists, authenticity kind of come together. So we, ask them to design us something, and we pick for each our
Amazing.
release something, and we reward them with $125. I was like, for $125? Yeah. And, they do it for fun, really. Just like, here is money to spend on something silly. And I was like, that's amazing.
Right.
It's
Right.
it's a great idea. So we talked about it before, but they, like, not with them, but in a podcast, that, oh, you should look for some, artists. But just, they use their Instagram, and they're like, yeah, I mean, you want to do this? Let's try. And they get so many artworks, and they can even select what they want to use and what they don't want to use. It's really awesome.
That's really, really cool. Yeah, absolutely. And I share that association. A lot of our sort of core followers also are in the sort of design space, art space. I think, coffee and art and just creative thinking definitely go hand in hand. So,
Okay, so I have a few questions regarding entrepreneurship, but I'm most interested about, uh, you said you don't like that word, but well, that's what I'm going to use here. So sorry about that.
no, fair enough. It's just that it gets a little butchered,
I
but I
know.
mean, I guess I'm trying to, own it now and just, try to be a better version of that than just using it as a kind of a cool phrase, because I mean, you know this, Valerian. I mean, you've been an entrepreneur yourself. I mean, it is fucking, you know, tough, man.
What's the hardest part?
So yeah, what's the hardest part? I I guess two things. One is the kind of inherent guilt that comes with ever feeling like you don't want to be on the clock. Like, like you kind of always have to be on the clock, right? And then you're like, but I don't want to, and I want this other person to handle this thing in full. And then you're like, but I don't know if I'll ever fully see it exactly the same way as somebody that might be working with me. But then trying to start making, reasonable compromises to say, hey, we're a team. I've got to, allow you, X person that I'm trusting with, X part of the business to make some decisions, without doing it exactly the same way that I might, but then retaining a certain understanding of the certain standard that we're trying to hit. I think the hardest part is like letting go a little bit, actually, like after some time, and setting up, processes and expectations with individuals on the team. So I think that's been a big learning process for me. And then yeah, just finding the ability to just clock out and not work. Those are the two things that I would
So here,
say
here is a
stand
funny
out. Yeah.
story about that. So I was entrepreneur since I came to United States in 2010, all the way to last May. I'm still a little bit because I have other projects going on, but last May I took this job. It was the first job I had for many, many years. And I had one of the first reviews with Willem, and except that he hates me and, he hates everything I do here. No, I'm kidding. So he said, he likes that I approach it like it would be my own business. And I'm always like,
Absolutely.
I don't even know how to approach things differently like it would be my own business. I just forgot how that works to be just an employee and not care, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess employees
Yeah.
care. I don't know. I don't remember those times, when I was just an employee, like, I don't know, what was it, 15 years ago, how much I cared or not. I don't know. Anyway,
Fair
do you
enough.
have some, like, I always ask this question because, you have some experience. Some people are just getting into this, world of entrepreneurship business. Do you have, let's say, a few tips for them, 3 to 5 tips you would tell them that, hey, guys, do this or avoid this?
Wow. I think we've actually, like, I've given a little bit of this unsolicited advice already a little bit in the podcast, but I think one thing for sure would be working in, the food and beverage space or the hospitality space, depending on how you position what you're doing. I really think that it has a lot of, glorification and sex appeal and all of these things, for rightful reason in some way. But I think it's really important to kind of understand the nuts and bolts of what makes that engine run, whether you're starting a roastery alone or whether you're starting a food program with your coffee program, or which often ends up being the case in some way or the other. I guess all I would say is, with this particular sector or industry that myself, Valerian, and others in our trade operate in, I think it's a good idea to know, like, yes, we talked about the fact that you might not be, like, earning six figures off the bat and stuff like that, and that's certainly something worth knowing. But I think even beyond that, Valerian, like, the grind, no pun intended, but the grind that it kind of really requires, the hustle and the grind to perfect something that is in between science and art, in as sourcing coffee, analyzing it, roasting it, packaging it. It really it spans, all of the areas of science, art, business. Like, it's quite a multifaceted thing. And I think a lot of times people see, like, a nice roaster in a shop and they're like, oh my God, like, I'll drop coffee beans inside and I'll buy this roaster, and then I'll have, like, I'll be someone cool that people associate with coffee. And I think it's, I mean, if you're lucky, hopefully that happens. But I think there's a lot of complexity to it that folks might not initially understand, and I think that's okay. It's just not presuming that okay, it's coffee, it's consumer, it's cool maybe, and it's a simple thing. For example, not getting the adequate training, not getting, not going into a boot academy and investing
Oh,
that
thank
time,
you.
energy, money. Yeah, yeah, there you go. There's my little plug. But no, but I mean, but I really do think that those are very, very worthwhile, investments of time, energy, and money, to make sure that you're really airtight about what you want to do, and and of course there'll always be a level of risk involved, and coffee is, in the end, a fairly competitive space, as is, depending where you're located, of course, but as is bread and baking increasingly as well, in our context. So I think that's one, and then maybe like one other key thing would be, try to, I would really, I'd already do this. I mean, not that I'm very experienced. I mean, I'm two and a half, year old kind of entrepreneur at this point. But I, I really believe that, coming up with a unique identity that can be represented through design is so critical to making any consumer brand worth its salt and sustain itself, in an increasingly, given e-commerce and given the ease of, starting, relative ease and relative, inexpense, let's say, relatively, of starting, purely digital, business. I think it's easy to sometimes get carried away and say, hey, it's not that large of an investment if I do it this way, and maybe I don't have to spend that much time on, I can just make this a volume game, and I can sell this amount of roasted coffee, and I can create a few strategic relationships in wholesale and go that way, which is all very possible. But I feel the dividends, that would come from, and we talked about this in the podcast, not necessarily investing thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in doing this, but just using your own inherent creativity, if you're interested in coffee, to work with, whether it's artists or young designers or other talented people in that would be very keen to have the opportunity to represent a brand like yours. I think it's important to kind of, logic that out, and have it be very, very, like, sharp and focused, when, before launching, something, in the food and beverage industry.
Yeah, I agree with you. I learned it on my own skin when Green Plantation used to have very simple packaging, and it wasn't horrible. It was actually, I would say, pretty cool for what it was. And when we improved it, and we, hired a professional designer and did a better job with it, I mean, we were taking more seriously. So, and I love your approach that you should be authentic. You should be you, giving, rather than just focusing on a bulkness of the coffee, how much you're going to sell, because there's so much competition. You have to stand out, and the fact that you guys are doing Indian coffee. And by the way, I forgot to mention this, but this is, I think, super important, because I love wine. I love terroir. I know that French think that the best wine on the world is French, and Italian thinks the best word in Italian is Italian, which is great because they're so proud of their own product, right? Me as
Yeah,
Hungarian,
yeah.
I think the Hungarian wine is awesome, right? And I'm so proud of it. And I think that origins have to do the same. Otherwise, there'll be no expensive coffee. Otherwise, people will always think about coffee as commodity. So
Yes.
and there are few companies which are kind of like launching in all the origins and kind of taking it seriously. And the people at origin start to drink coffee. That would make it, like, yeah, more
Yes.
expensive. Yeah, sure. But on also other hand, like, more valuable, right? For everyone. It's like, it's not just a commodity.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be treated like that.
Absolutely, and Larry, like, we didn't talk about this too much today, but interesting thing that we've been doing is, given the terroir that you mentioned in India, and, the fact that processing evolutions and knowledge transfer is making up in large part for some inherent geographic,
Disadvantages?
disadvantages, being sort of, slightly lower elevation than, Ethiopian coffees, and other origins that are inherently, higher elevation. There are some, so the processing, I call it an evolution or even a revolution, is very much in full force, whether it's experimental processing, which I am certainly interested in at Subco, but even just your standard processing practices. I mean, which I know Valerian is more into. But or I gathered this, during our cupping, activities. But so everything from, harvesting, selective harvesting and picking to adequate, simple but adequate fermentation, even without using yeasts and inoculants and all these things, and drying methodologies and training of the staff on the estates and the plantations to understand each of these pieces is happening at scale in India now, which is very, very interesting, and it should be very interesting, I think, to everybody in the world, because we're talking about a country with a large volume of coffee that could be very, very interesting to explore in the specialty circuit in the next 5 years. And I think some of the experimental lots that we work with have been phenomenally high scoring, and we've been very proud of the producers mainly, and we've just done the presentation and the finishing and the roasting, of course. But and interestingly, we talked about this, Valerian. We also have been dipping our feet into specialty robusta recently.
And Liberica you mentioned
So
last time.
and Liberica as well. So that's something that Valerian and I spoke about as well, is maybe doing something together with Liberica at some point. And so I think we're going to see weirdly, unexpectedly, India might end up being the terroir that can redefine these quote unquote alternate species of coffee from a quality point of view. Like, I swear, Valerian, like, I'm not gonna. One of our closest partner states recently did some kind of very extended ferment. I believe it was an anaerobic process with Robusta. And man, I mean, when I drank this coffee, I was, I was absolutely just, I, I, I genuinely couldn't believe what I was tasting. This was a coffee that probably could compete for like an 88 to 90 point Arabica coffee. Had come from this Robusta plant, and so there are interesting things happening. Like many things in India, like a leapfrogging effect seems to be occurring in coffee, and in wheat, and in other things that we work with, in specialty wheat and stuff. That is a separate conversation. But instead of maybe the more typical journey that, let's say, a Colombia or Brazil might have taken, which started in commodity and then went to kind of like, okay, consistent supply of 83 to 86 point coffee, and then okay, now we have your super specialty geisha plantations all over the Central American region and stuff, like Mr. Booth's plantations, scoring 91s, 92s, 93s, 94s. India has kind of, I would say, like, skipped that sort of consistent long 80 to 84 point kind of, which there's a bunch of amazing reliable coffee in that range now that's being produced in India. But I think we're quickly getting to the point where that 85 plus point coffee is becoming more and more regularized, and there's more and more incentive for the planters to invest in producing it. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying that I think there's a very interesting and bright future for South Asian and Asian coffee in general, and I hope that us at Subko can play a positive role in committing to that region of the world, and to kind of avoiding the temptation at times to take on beautiful coffees from Latin America and sort of the African continent, because our goal in the end is very, very targeted to being an Asian specialty coffee roaster that started at origin, and that would one day, with enough support, would love to share a story on a global level.
So as I said, I salute you for that, and it's great. And I think that when it comes to coffees, I always think that you have to take in consideration the terroir. So when it comes to Brazil, I do expect the chocolate and Nutella coffee, and let's make it clean, not too earthy, and amazing. Like if it has a little acidity, kind of highlighting those things, I want that. So that's why I kind of, I'm a weirdo in a coffee world, and I really don't like the
Right.
controlled processes. They remind me of a plastic surgery. There's like even in this ugly face, there's a beauty, right? So like it's like they call it the wabi sabi philosophy in
Yeah.
design, right? So the imperfection can also create a perfection, and I
Fair
think
enough.
that focusing on the right Arabica varietals or even species, the coffee species, coffea
Yeah.
species,
Yeah.
for me is more exciting than putting something in a barrel, add a yeast, and create the same profile all over the world. And by the way, I did score those coffees high because I know that I shouldn't be calibrated and I know how the people score them. Do I want to drink them? Heck no. It's interesting. It's interesting. Like I
Yeah.
I was like,
Exactly.
oh yeah, that's cool.
Exactly.
But now I'm scared that okay, if you use seed dry yeast or whatever, and all the coffees will taste the same on the world, I mean, aren't we going away from that with when we go to Starbucks, for example?
Fair.
So I
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
more a
Yeah.
purist, man. I'm sorry.
No, it's totally fair, and I think there is, and I know I owe Valerian some coffee beans from a few different origins soon, so he'll see this when I send them. But I think I of course I do have a special interest in the controlled processes, and I think it's something that is able to wow a lot of people around Indian coffee in the beginning, and then I believe the arc that we can go on is be like, okay, there is quality there. There is some science being exercised, and then climbing down that ladder a bit and being like, okay, well, there are some just really great standard naturals and some really great red honeys and pink honeys and whatever else might be not using inoculants and yeasts and barrels. And so I think our philosophy does straddle the two. I don't think that we're in that zone where we are only searching for highly controlled inoculated processes and extended fermentations. I think we do have a fairly unique breadth of micro lots that we work with. So I think yeah, but I completely respect that opinion, and I think the
Oh, thank you.
terroir is an integral part of the story that we need to tell, especially being an origin that is still kind of emerging on the global specialty map when it comes to India.
As an old person, I would say, you will see in 5 or 10 years, I was right.
There you go.
No, it's I am happy to take that shirt on me. Like natural wines now, natural fermentation. I found the natural yeast and bacteria our fascinating world. It's like I love them, so I'm opposing that. But okay, let's play with that. Let's see where it takes me. What's the future
Exactly.
for in Valerian English Subko or in the normal English? Sorry, it was Subko in Valerian English and Subko in normal English.
Wow, the future. Well, I didn't get to share a lot about the circumstances we were born in, but to put it in 30 seconds, I mean, we a lot of these ideas were incredibly, I mean, they were already kind of very difficult to, I'd say, fairly ambitious and unlikely to have, I don't know if we've succeeded, but unlikely to have worked in some way, resonated with people. But adding to that was that we ended up launching our first, like our tiny like roastery, cafe, bakery space, which was in a converted, it is in a converted 100-year-old sort of colonial Portuguese home in like these tiny little lanes in one neighborhood in Bombay called Bandra. And when we did launch that space, it ended up being, open for 72 hours approximately, and then COVID had made its way to India, and the prime minister there like suddenly shut down the entire country, and it was all kind of a mess. But basically, we had an immense, very unlikely challenge at our hands when we started, and then we were focusing on the cafe concept at first, and then we thought, okay, I developed this whole retail packaging line, and I printed out a certain amount of, produced a certain amount of packaging and kept it in like a warehouse. But I was like, okay, we'll see in like 3 to 6 months based on how the cafe is going if we start retailing beans, and that was sort of the logic. Suddenly everything flipped on its head. We don't have a cafe anymore. No one really knows about who we are. And so we pulled out all of our retail packaging, and we started to build out a Shopify experience, and we started to kind of figure out how to start communicating with people. I mean, in the heat of that initial first wave, I mean, nobody was interested in taking on a new brand and trying to there wasn't that people were latching on to kind of safety and familiarity and all these things. So we really had to find a way to break through that clutter, and so I'm forgetting what your question actually was here,
My
but
question was, what's
basically,
your
what's on the
future?
horizon? What's the future? Yeah. So a bit about the past. So then, what ended up happening, Valerian, is the first wave, we steadily kind of started engaging through Instagram with people, and we developed, like, fortunately for us, in our neighborhood, and then in Bombay, and then eventually in even in all across other parts of India, we started to, that probably took a span of 12 to 15 months, what I described, but basically, we developed an increasingly strong and fortunately quite, like, loyal following for the microlot program that we present, and sort of all the various design experiences, and of course those who are in Bombay can enjoy the sourdough and the experimental croissants. So that's where things started, and when the first wave kind of ended and they opened up, like, seating inside spaces for the first time at like 50% capacity and this and that, and there was all sorts of different rules and regulations at the time. We were completely stunned because the 6 months that we had spent on digital trying to build, like, affinity for what we were doing, it seemed to have resulted in this, like, every weekend, like, huge queues down the block, like, people waiting for coffee and croissants at our space, and it was, unexpected, to say the least, and very humbling. And so that's where this, I think that they started to become kind of a bit of a, I guess, like a cult following for Subko, in Bombay, then in India, and that, on the heels of that, I guess, been we'd been written about in Sprudge, and, like, we last year we ended up winning, the runner up, but hey, I'll take it. We won the runner up, for the Sprudgy Awards that they do every year, and as the best new specialty coffee shop in the world. This company in this cafe in Texas won it, but and on the heels of that, Standard Magazine decided to cover us in their issue, like 25, I think it was, and so a bunch of very fortunate things kind of happened in a row. And in terms of the future, Valerian, I think there's two key things. One is I'm actively thinking about approaching a new vertical, which I'll keep a little bit of a secret. But Valerian has also been toying with this particular agricultural crop, and I think he's been doing some cool work. I tasted one of the end products he built out of it, and we grow another crop in India, which can be quite akin to coffee from a processing and a finished product point of view. And we're thinking of doing something, making a big commitment to another product line, which also takes us to origin and is very processing driven and involves roasting. And anyway, I'm sure some of you can figure it out by
I
now.
think
But yeah,
the
that's
easiest
what
way
we're
to
working
figure
on
it
next.
out, and there's a pitch, go to Boot Coffee website, look at the courses, and there is one in August of doing that, and it's not coffee. So there, homework.
Awesome. I like that. And then secondarily, Valerian, is we just, in fact, like, last week we started shipping coffee beans to the US, the UK, roasted coffee, and the UAE, like, to Dubai and the Emirates. So, that's our first kind of foray into engaging with the broader world around Indian specialty. And my hope is that, we can actually create, more brick and mortar experiences in other parts of the world, and tell this story more broadly, outside of India, while retaining our focus on origin. So that's sort of the two-pronged, I'd say, next kind of future for Subco, is we're looking at, again, hopefully people keep supporting us the way they have, and we can grow that support. And if that's the case, we'd like to showcase what we do to other parts of the world. So that's sort of on my radar, and this new vertical. So
Awesome. All right, man. That was a long one. Lots of editing to happen. No, not really. But I usually give my guests a chance to ask me a question if you have one. So, do you have a question for me?
Yeah, I have a few. One is like, where did you get this Hawaiian shirt? Because I need to get one. It's
You really want to know?
no, no.
It's the TJ Maxx,
Yeah.
man.
Oh, that's amazing. They have the best shirts, man. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, you can't beat that. No, but on a slightly serious note, Valerian. I mean, do you you get to cup arguably pretty much the best coffees in the world and regularly and do you think that there is a story to tell when it comes to Asia, Asian origins, India? How do you, in my view, like it's sort of this, like, in a sense, like the last frontier with reasonable volume of coffee that exists that people don't really know anything about. And obviously, in recent years, you have like Myanmar that's kind of come up and broken through in a few senses. You have some Chinese origins that people have been talking about, a little bit of Filipino coffee. But do you think a brand like ours, if we could amalgamate all of that and present a really strong, set of products that are focused on that region, could be interesting to people, given you're a trainer and you're an educational coffee professional and you understand the market well?
Oh, those are nice words. No, 100%. I think uh, for me, what's disappointing on a Q, we have different category Q grader exams that we get coffees from the CQI, and the Asians are usually very Asian. I mean, it's just like the old world,
Yeah.
the Sumatra, the Papua New Guinea,
Yes.
and it's okay. But where are the Thailand coffees? Where are the Indian coffees? Where are the
Yes.
other Asian coffees? China, like I had a very interesting Chinese coffee. It didn't score 90 points, but it for me it doesn't have to, because I'm not looking for
Yeah.
a score competition. I'm looking for, oh, is this interesting? Does it uh, show you somehow the terroir? Does it somehow show you something interesting from that terroir? So actually, that Chinese coffee I remember for the same region where the pu'er, the tea, is grown, and I didn't know that. I was
Oh,
just
cool.
tasted the coffee.
Yeah.
I was like, this reminds me of pu'er tea, and I was like, okay,
Wow.
there is some connection here. Yeah, and Indian coffee, man. It's like I was working with the last time I was working with Indian coffee was the Monsoon Malabar, and that was 20 years ago.
Okay.
So that's
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
people know, and it's like, and now you're mentioning all
Exactly.
these amazing coffees. Where are they? I want them. So, and I think that's a great. I mean, Vietnamese, Laos, right? All those coffees are
Yes.
everything. Think of Vietnam as
Absolutely.
Robusta land. No, there are Arabicas too,
Yes.
and I'm sure that, as you mentioned, the Robusta from India that they have now. Okay, let's put a special process on it. It's going to happen. Same with Liberica. Like Liberica is very weird, but nobody ever gave it a chance. We don't know too much about it. We don't know how to roast it.
Yeah.
When we talked about it, we agreed that it roasts very weirdly and it doesn't have a first crack. It has multiple first cracks. But maybe we roast it
Right.
badly, right?
Right.
Because nobody really approached it that way. So I think
Right.
it's like almost like a Candyland of exploration. I think so. You are in a Candyland, man.
Well, thank you. I'll try to keep that in mind and do it justice, Valerian. So thank you.
Well, thank you so very much. Before I let you go, let us know where people can find you.
Oh, sure. So yeah, anyone that's curious about Indian and Asian specialty and the entire Subco experience that we're trying to build, please check us out on primarily on Instagram at the moment. At the rate or at Subco Coffee, Subko Coffee. And as I mentioned, if anyone's interested in actually tasting any of the coffee, if you're not in India, if you're in India, please DM me and I'll come and meet you, and it'll be great. And we'll, cup coffee together. But if you're based out here in the States or in Europe, depending on where, we could include you in this pilot global shipping that we're doing. So the website is www.subko.coffee, and you can just select the global shipping store, and we can connect that way. So Yeah.
And no worries, I'll put all those links into the show notes so people don't have to kind of like, oh, what is this? So just go
Oh yeah,
coffees.me.
of course. And I've given Valerian my personal, like my email and my Instagram handle, I believe. If not, I will. And please feel free to reach out to me with any thoughts, any feedback, any interesting collaboration conversations that you might want to have with us. Would appreciate all of that.
And don't forget your credit card number. Okay.
No, this is all.
Thank you so much
Good
for
stuff.
being here. Listener, thank you for tuning in to another episode of coffees.me podcast, this time with video. I hope you enjoyed seeing us, and I hope I didn't disappoint that I have notes, because now you guys know. All right. Everyone, have a good one. Bye.
Thank you, Valerian. Take care, guys.